Hello, hello! Welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British Rail critics, and of course my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains brutal. And today, you're probably wondering why I'm showing my face to you again. Because I know I went through a period where I was trying to do that, but it actually caused views to go down? Probably because I'm ugly. So now you're probably wondering, wait a minute, why are you showing us your stupid face again, Darkness? Well, there's actually a very good reason for that this time. It's not just because I felt like doing it. If I could get around it, I wouldn't. But because of the shaky nature of copyright, and things like that, I wanted to make absolutely certain that I could definitely classify this under fair use. And the best way to do that is to make sure there's plenty of my own video in this particular review. And review sounds weird for me to say because I don't do those anymore, but this is super relevant to the content I produce here on this channel because it has to do with our old friend and nemesis and stalker and organization that just refuses to leave me alone, British Rail. Absolutely, of course. And it's about a public service video. PSA, I guess you would call it. Sort of. Kind of. That they commissioned to be made in the 70s. That's well, it gets the job done. This is the finishing line. I bet you're wondering, British Rail made films? Well, not generally directly, but they did commission a different organization that kind of operated under them in a weird way. British Transport Films was founded in 1949, and they specialized in making films, mostly documentaries, about various different British transportation networks. Now, actually, British Rail fell heavily underneath that category, though British Rail also happened to be their biggest customer. Now, BTF went defunct in 1982, though interestingly, British Rail kept using their name until at least 1986. For reasons that I don't fully understand. But regardless of any of that, the point is that they did make a bunch of films, and they weren't necessarily bad movies. Like, they weren't like blockbuster films, obviously. They were fairly low budget. But they were documentaries, informational type deals, and they're harmless for the most part. But the finishing line stands out. Not only is it relevant to what I do here when it comes to trains generally, but it is something else. Like, I don't know what British Rail was on. I don't know if they had any say with the content of this particular movie, or if they approved it at all before it was released, but yo! Public information films started out pretty vanilla, basically saying stupid common sense things like cover your mouth when you cough or sneeze, because apparently at some point the powers that be decided that people are stupid. And that's fair. But after a while, they started realizing that people were doing ridiculously dumb things, even when death was involved. So they thought, well, what if we show them the grisly consequences of such actions? And after that, a lot of these films started getting really dark.
But hey, I'm wearing a busted harness here. And the company should have checked those tanks.
But in their defense, they did get the point across. A lot of the activities that were being shown in the films are inherently dangerous and could very easily get you killed. So maybe, just maybe, all the safety warnings that are placed around areas where you're not supposed to go are there for a reason. It's not the man coming down on the populace, it's literally trying to keep you alive. The railway, of course, has a big problem with that historically. All over the world, people are like, yeah, I'll just cross the tracks whenever. Yeah, I don't care about the flashing lights. It's just an option. They're more like guidelines is what they are. No, they're not guidelines. They're there for a reason. If they're going off, there is a train coming and you are going to get annihilated. Okay, stay off the tracks. Even if there isn't any obvious warning signs, the tracks aren't supposed to be played on. You could easily get a foot stuck or trip and hit your head or something, and then you get run over. And I assure you, generally speaking, if you get run over by a train, you are dead. Or, best case scenario, permanently maimed for life. So, it does seem reasonable that British Rail would want to make an informational film meant for children, I should probably stress that, explaining why you're not supposed to play on the railroad tracks to young kids, and showing the dangers of doing so. Because kids are kids. I'm a single dad. I get that. My son will sometimes be like, I'm gonna run off, and I'm like, Jack, there's a road there! And then he stops, and I'm like, look both ways before you cross the street. And then he does. Fortunately, he's learned that as he's gotten older. But young kids don't always know. They're kids. Kids are gonna be kids. Part of a parent's responsibility is making sure they understand the dangers of such activities, so they know how to get through life, without dying prematurely. That is what parents are supposed to do. But not all parents are created equal, and sometimes kids still do things that are inherently stupid. So in a way, I actually appreciate that British Rail wanted to make it a point to make sure that people in general, especially children, understand the dangers of playing on railways. But the methodology here is a little, again, And I will say that I'm gonna edit out a lot of the more gruesome elements of this because I really don't want to fall into this is a video only for adults type deal. I try to make content here relatively family friendly. Yeah, I joke around a bit, but I never swear or do anything particularly gruesome or hostile or too scary. But this movie has made it very hard for me to avoid that, so I'm gonna have to describe some scenes to you. And that'll help me avoid copyright strikes anyway in case someone gets mad. Though it's an old movie and it's not like it's well known, so I don't think there'll be an issue. Hopefully not. We'll see how it goes. Either way, the movie starts out zooming in on a bridge. The bridge in question is apparently the Station Road Railway Bridge. And most of the movie is filmed there, though there is a part that was filmed 3.5 miles, 5.63 kilometers, south of the current Watnet Stone Railway Station. At the time, Watnet Stone Station was actually closed, so it makes sense they would use, lines they just weren't using in order to film. Additionally, they use a locomotive in it, specifically a DMU. And I had to dig pretty hard to figure out what this was, and by dig, I mean literally look at it by sight to figure out what the heck this DMU was, because I'm sure plenty of people were going to ask if I didn't. I am 99% certain that this is a Class 125. These DMUs were built by Derby Works in 1958. And though the film at no point gives me a clear shot where I can see the number of this unit, what I can say is that those DMUs were actually being withdrawn in 1977 during the time this was being filmed and released. So given the fact that this particular DMU actually gets its windows broken during filming, it makes sense they would want to use a train that they were getting rid of anyway. Not a single one of the 125s was preserved at all, just for relevance. Although I do concede that it could also be a Class 116, as those were very, very, very visually similar to the 125s, but I don't think so, because the 116s lasted way longer than the 125s in service. They weren't withdrawn completely until 1995, so I wouldn't imagine that British Rail would want to damage a locomotive or multiple unit train, whatever it is, that they were going to use afterwards. It seems reasonable that they would give the filmmakers a train that they were getting rid of anyway. Regardless, there's this kid sitting on the bridge, and we get a narration, presumably a past discussion, with his headmaster at his school. Basically telling him and a bunch of other kids that they're playing on the rail lines, and they really shouldn't do that because the railway is not the game field. However, the headmaster failed to realize that this child is in fact a complete psychopath.
Yeah, but if it was, I'd have special races and plenty of trains. There'd be my special scoring system and a big scoreboard 20 feet high.
No, George, or whatever your name is. That is not a good... What? The kid starts imagining this and how it plays out, apparently going to some kind of imaginative universe where apparently regular course of action for kids and organizations like the schools is to have them play small Olympic events on railway tracks. And there's only so much of this I can already take. This is some battle royale nonsense. Is this some kind of train-themed death game we got going on? Because... okay, as an anime, that might actually be a little bit interesting, but as, taking place in the real world, this is gonna be nothing but terrible. Probably worth mentioning at this point that this film actually won 2 different awards. A Certificate of Appreciation, as well as an Oberhausen Mention at the Festival of Youth Paris. I'm not familiar with either of those 2 awards, but they won awards, so I guess, whatever. I mean, from a cinematography perspective, it's actually pretty well done, though I do think the pacing in the beginning is absolutely atrocious, because we get a bunch of setting shots showing the kids just bumbling around and being children, and the adults just trying to organize everything. Though I do love the heavy foreshadowing with the stretchers being taken out, like that was a nice touch. The psychopath kid on the bridge continues to describe his events, his great, events with a band and everything and a big scoreboard. There's 4 teams of different colors. The first game is called Fence Breaking. It's literally the teams racing across the railroad tracks. They have to break through the fence first, though, as generally, railroad tracks are fenced in, specifically to prevent people from crossing them like morons. But these kids are told to do it as part of the game. They tear open holes in the fence the best way they can, and then run across the railway lines. Of course, then the Class 125 shows up, and knowing it's about to be scrapped itself, it is hungry for delicious blood. One of the kids manages to fall, which is a thing that can easily happen when crossing railroad tracks, as they are not designed to be walked on. And despite there being plenty of children that could easily drag him off said railway line, they're just like, it's your own fault. And they leave him, and he dies. Then you get a nice shot of all the kids staring in confusion, like they didn't really expect that could happen, like one of them could easily die. Like, it's a train. Children, I'm only asking you to use the brains that you have in your craniums. It's just one of those things to me. Literally playing stupid games wins you stupid prizes, alright? I get the point of the films to show the consequences of these kind of actions, but setting it up as, like, an Olympic sporting event, like an actual event set up by adults for the kids to do? No, like that's not how I would have done that. The next event is stone throwing. Every single team throws color bricks, each representing the color of their team, at the train, and tries to score as much damage as possible. The more damage, the higher the points, it seems. And this is actually a really good event in my mind, on the basis of showing the consequences of the actions. It's pretty normal for people to point out that, you can die if you play on the railway lines. But kids still do stupid things, and one of the things might be to throw stuff at a train just for fun. This event illustrates, very brutally in fact, how bad that can go. And this is also the event that makes me think this has to be a 125, because they really did break the windows of this thing. And I can't imagine they would want the filmmakers breaking the windows of their train if they weren't actually going to scrap it no matter what. So this DMU being destined for the scrap heap does make some sense, given what they wind up doing with it. Also, I cannot show you any more of the inside of this train, because this is where things get really, really, really brutal. There's a lot of blood, mostly on people's faces, implied to have been hit with bricks. And the judges who walk through the train and inspect the damage don't even seem to care that these people are suffering. They pick up the brick and radio back how many points the team received. It's really dystopian, actually, in the way it goes about it. Interestingly though, despite the fact the glass is broken, they must have done that with hammers or something after the fact during shooting. Because when the kids are throwing the rocks, it's pretty obvious that they're actually just bits of foam that bounce off harmlessly. I assume that decision was made due to the safety of the train's driver. There has to be at least one person in that train. They certainly wouldn't want to throw actual rocks at the actual train, because doing that would kind of defeat the purpose of what they're trying to explain to these kids right now. I'm just saying. The third game is very similar to the first one, but a little bit different. This is literally a game of chicken. As opposed to the first one, which was trying to break through the fence and hope a train doesn't show up, this game literally has a train show up by default. That's literally part of it. The kids have to run across the lines before they get hit by the train, which does do a good job of illustrating the point of not playing chicken with the train. Even the kid imagining this, little psychopath that he may be, does make it a point to mention that if a train is moving at 50 miles per hour, given the distance they're working with, you have about 3 seconds to get across that track before you get hit. And the train can be moving faster than that. Apparently only the judges know how fast the train is going. Because again, dystopian nightmare battle royale, but with trains. Teams are paired up on each side, and they're running at each other. So when the kids are running across, they're constantly bumping into one another and knocking each other over because they're kids and they're idiots. They actually try to strategize before it, and it's hysterical. Like, how do you strategize this? There's no strategy here. The only strategy that seems to come across that they seem to repeatedly say is, when you see the train, just run. Like, okay, yes, if you're in this situation, that is your best call. If you must, like if someone puts a gun to your head and says run, also, you could just lose the game, can you forfeit? Is that okay? Because I don't think running across the... No. In fact, it does seem to result in many an argument among the teams, because some of the kids just don't want to do it. And, you know, those kids are the smart ones. They're gonna go far in life. Many children die as a result of this event, and though I already mentioned one, but now they're upping the body count. I got a thing about dead kids. I don't do that. I don't know. That's not, like, I'm pretty desensitized to gore. I play a lot of horror video games, and I've seen plenty of horror movies, so that's not a big deal to me. But there's just something about dead children that really irks me, and I don't like dealing with it, and I don't want you to have to deal with it. So I'm not going to show the dead children that much, at least not when it comes to the blood and stuff on them. Again, I'm trying to avoid making this not a family-friendly experience, but it's hard to do that when this film's content is what it is. But like I said, plenty of the kids die, because duh. And then we move on to our final event, the Great Tunnel Walk. Calling this particular event an event in terms of physical prowess seems really dumb to me, because the kids don't run through the tunnel. They just kind of leisurely move in a line, and it takes them forever to do that, by the way. But again, I do think there was some thought put into it when it comes to illustrating safety. If there's one definite thing you don't want to do, if you're going to be on tracks at all, you shouldn't be there in the first place. But assuming you are, definitely, absolutely, 100% never, ever go into a train tunnel. Say you're walking along the side of the tracks, like a fair distance away, but you come across a hill, and there's a tunnel for the train, but there's no tunnel for you. Don't. Please. Don't go into that tunnel. There's no wiggle room in a tunnel. There's only enough room for the train. And if one comes, you're basically hosed. At least if you were walking on the tracks, like there's still room to either side of the tracks generally for you to move off of it. The tunnel has no such benefit. Do not go into a railway tunnel for the same reasons you don't walk into a car tunnel. They're built for vehicles to move very fast through, not for you to leisurely stroll through, or any of these children for that matter. And yeah, they get mowed down by the only DMU that went through it. I assume it's the same one they were already using, but this really confused me, because every single child gets, at best, horribly injured. Most of them wind up dead, and they lined them up on the rails, which is nice and horrific. Thank you for that. But this is a 2-rail tunnel. It's very wide. Logically, there's room so that half the kids shouldn't have been mowed down. If you had 2 trains going through it, I could understand. And this could have been easily done with the same DMU. Just get a shot of it going through once, and then move it to the other track, and then bring it back the other way. You could just mesh those shots in post-editing. That would have illustrated why all the kids got injured, but they only do it once, which doesn't really hammer home things quite as well, but still, yeah, it makes sense. I believe that you shouldn't do this. I mean, I already knew that, but maybe the kids didn't. Maybe they didn't think about it. People are stupid that way. Childhood is the time when you're supposed to learn things, so I get that, but this film was deemed as way too much. Parents who found out their children had seen it were absolutely horrified by the contents of the film, because there was a way to advertise railway safety without making it so unspeakably brutal. Does that hammer home why you shouldn't? Yeah, but these are kids. You don't have to make it that alarming. And the film was actually banned for about 20 years, apparently, because of public outcry. British Rail wound up commissioning BTF to make a different movie called Robbie, which still involves a kid getting hurt by a train by being incredibly stupid. He survives, but he's crippled for life. It's still pretty dark, but it's not quite as grotesque as the finishing line turned out to be. Again, was British Rail directly responsible for it? Well, I'm not gonna say that they necessarily knew what they were in for when it came to what BTF was making. Maybe they didn't know it from the start, or maybe they didn't realize how bad it was gonna turn out in terms of the brutality. But what I will say is that they did know it when the film was finished and still chose to distribute it anyway. Some schools even showed it to their kids, and there are some reports of kids passing out by being so scared of it, or many were simply stunned into silence, which that makes more sense, I believe that. The point was they may have went just a touch over, shall we say, the finishing line. Get it? I'm sorry. and so saw fit to deliver a different film that still illustrates the same points about railway safety without scaring children necessarily. Most public information films or PSAs aren't quite so outrageously brutal these days, and even if they are, they're meant for adults, not kids. Because you don't necessarily need overwhelming violence to tell a story or explain why something is dangerous. But some people still actually genuinely like this film and think it was a good idea, so I'll leave you guys to discuss that in the comments. All I know is, it's British Rail again. And if you guys want, I'll talk about Robbie sometime in the future. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders. Thomas Ward, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Royal Hudson 2860, Lord Hoth 444, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mr. Black Rose, Master of None, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Matthew Gavin, Arthur Roy, DM Trouble Typhoon, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Alaric Jaspers, Brian, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Major Klutz, Hayden DeGrow, Ohio Trucker 1, and Ty Hammonds Jr. Till next time, this is Darkness, and a bid you all a fond farewell.